Good evening. Hope everybody's well tonight. Outside, it's very cold. So, it is my honor to welcome you to the University of Chicago's 33rd Annual Martin Luther King Jr. Commemoration Celebration. My name is Orion Douglas, and I am a second year in the college where I serve as the creative director of the African Caribbean Students Association. I'm sure we all can agree that our lives in the last 2 years have been like no other. We witnessed a number of deaths due to COVID-19 and violence skyrocketing in rates by the thousands. At first, without a doubt, our daily routines were shattered and beyond immediate repair. And now, we are left to assemble the pieces to a puzzle that has no reference image, an attempt to create a new normal. Nonetheless, despite having extensive access to Dr. King's words and experiences, we continue to mourn the senseless loss of life in America, caused by racism, hate, and prejudice, time and time again. I don't know about any of you, but my heart is heavy and worn. However, I am not here to inform you about the world or remind you of the current state we already know we're in, but rather to challenge you to recognize that we are one of many in what Dr. King calls a beloved community. The beloved community describes a global vision of people working together to share the earth's bounty so that all can thrive. The people of our beloved community recognize the inherent worth of all people. Prejudice, cruelty, and greed are replaced by an inclusive spirit of friendship and goodwill. Our goal is to create a beloved community, said Dr. King. And to do this will require a qualitative change in our souls, as well as a quantitative change in our lives. The healing that is essential at this moment for the lives lost does not have to be done alone. And the violence that we consistently witness does not have to become our new normal. But how do we do this, though? A year before Dr. King was assassinated in 1968, he wrote his first draft of what would be one of his most influential books. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? And to get the conversation started tonight, I would like us to sit with this question. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? When Dr. King began writing, he disconnected from the civil rights movement. He rented a house in Jamaica with no telephone, with a hope to reflect on his experiences when racial tensions were at their worst. In his writings, he laid out the intersections of race relations in America, leaving us with his hope for economic equality in, unfortunately, what would be his last manuscript. During his time away, King reflected on his time in Chicago. Inspired by the ordinary organizers and community members who had extreme challenges in the South Side, with Fairfield violence here in the Windy City and its suburbs. Dr. King was constantly teaching, learning, urging, and reminding Americans not only the powerful obstacles in our histories, our institutions, and our hearts, but also calling our attention to the amazing hope we represented. So how can we use this reconstruction of our day-to-day lives to rebuild our communities? Like King, how can we reflect on our time in isolation to create a space to acknowledge the humanity of one another. As we gather here tonight to celebrate Dr. King for his unwavering commitment to civil rights, it is essential that we recognize the moments in which he takes time to reflect, write, and process, and honor this alongside his other significant accomplishments. Apart from the community, each of us is one of many, and we can't forget that. Never be afraid to take a moment to step away and breathe. Process the grief, but also the joy and happiness. As change makers, agents of change, and quite frankly, as just people. Taking time does not make you selfish, but rather aware of the identities that you hold and how they impact those around you. So as we begin tonight's program in light of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, I want to get the conversation started, and I ask you again, where do we go from here? Thank you. Please join me in welcoming United Voices Chicago, formerly Chicago Children's Choir.
Let our rejoice Good evening and welcome. It's my honor and pleasure to welcome you to the University of Chicago and tonight's celebration and commemoration of the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. There are few Americans whose words have been as widely and regularly invoked as those of Dr. King. There is little wonder why. As an ardent advocate for equality and for justice for all, through his words and through his works, he called countless people to action. While the challenges and obstacles that imposed injustice upon the marginalized in our society may have shifted over the decades, and they have taken new shape since his lifetime, his call to action remains as vital as ever. The reach of his influence and impact touches us deeply today. This evening, we will have the opportunity to hear from some remarkable speakers who will reflect on Dr. King's call to action, including former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder, widely regarded for his career-long commitment to civil rights, and he will be joined in conversation by university trustee, alumna, and CEO of the Obama Foundation, Valerie Jarrett. Our speakers will be more formally introduced later in the program, but for now, I'd like to express my deep thanks to them for participating in this year's celebration. Please give them a warm welcome. There is good reason why we return over and over again to Dr. King's life and legacy for inspiration. His words suffuse our culture so broadly, precisely because they offer us something timeless, an invitation to contribute to the progress he made possible by those who came before us, and to carry the very best of what we've inherited from them to the next generation. Just a half hour ago, across the street, we had the opportunity to come together and to recognize an astonishing group of people with our Diversity Leadership Awards this year. They are alumni, faculty, students, and staff who, through their scholarship, through their advocacy, through their work, but also simply through their way of being in this world, have lived up to Dr. King's values and have pressed us to become stronger and to live up in an improved way to his legacy. I want to acknowledge them individually now. They're extraordinary people. They're all here with us. Dr. Monica E. Peak, who is widely regarded for her scholarship on racial, social, and economic health disparities. B. Young, who really is young at 90, recognized as one of the pioneers for the diversity and inclusion industry. With decades of experience as an accomplished general counsel, our other alumni recipient, Rick Palmore, is a leading advocate for greater diversity in the legal industry. Dr. Tracy Matthews has worked to deepen the university's connections to our Southside neighbors through her work as a historian, curator, and documentary filmmaker. Graduate student Lizeth Tamayo, she's a PhD candidate in genetic epidemiology and a committed advocate for best practices in recruiting, retaining, and supporting marginalized individuals across academia. And Tyler Okeke, who is the class of 2023 college recipient of the Diversity Leadership Award. He has held numerous leadership roles in student government and the African and Caribbean Students Association, as well as his service as undergraduate liaison to the Board of Trustees. Together, these remarkable individuals represent something truly vital about Dr. King's legacy. The endless potential in each person to inspire and drive change through their individual contributions to the betterment of society. Please join me in recognizing them. The enormous impact of the inspiration that Dr. King sparked here in Rockefeller Chapel on this campus during his visits here has unfolded in tangible and intangible ways that have shaped our community in Hyde Park for the better over so many decades. From deeply influencing the life and work of beloved civil rights leader, educator, Chicago historian, and alum Timuel Black, to inspiring the formation of United Voices Chicago, their powerful voices that we just heard. This is a group that is dedicated to uniting young people across diversity and difference all across Chicago. It's a group that has lent their moving talents to opening our program, and they are one of the many threads that originate from Dr. King and that help explain the fabric of so much of what makes Hyde Park and the broader South Side a locus of committed individuals and institutions joining together to face injustice and to drive change. If we are to address the great challenges of our time, we need the collective strength and the wisdom that comes with a multiplicity of perspectives and a unified sense of purpose. That strength has burgeoned here, and it exists in no small part due to Dr. King, the movements, and the many, many people that his example and life have inspired. In partnership with our neighbors locally in the South Side, broadly with the city of Chicago, and across higher education, we can bring our experiences, knowledge, and resources to bear and continue to fight for the future that Dr. King imagined. I'm filled with gratitude for the members of our community who undertake that work and give life to Dr. King's legacy through their scholarship, work, and advocacy each day. I'm delighted to celebrate with you what we have achieved, but also to envision the best way of what may lie ahead if we commit ourselves once again to achieving Dr. King's vision. I'd like now to welcome Sydney Chapman, who is currently a JD candidate in the law school, to introduce tonight's keynote speaker, Eric Holder. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Sydney Chapman, and I'm in my second year at the law school, and I also serve as the president of the Earl B. Dickerson chapter of the Black Law Students Association. It is my honor to be here with you all tonight and introduce Mr. Eric Holder, Jr. Born in the Bronx, New York, Mr. Holder attended Stuyvesant High School and graduated from Columbia College with a major in American History in 1973. He then went on to attend Columbia Law School, clerking at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and the Department of Justice's Criminal Division. Mr. Holder moved to Washington, D.C. and joined the Department of Justice in the Attorney General's Honors Program. He was tasked with fighting corruption and prosecuting public officials at local, state, and federal levels in the Public Integrity section. President Ronald Reagan nominated Mr. Holder to Associate Judge of the Superior Court of the District of Columbia in 1988. In 1993, President Bill Clinton appointed him to U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. Mr. Holder became the first African American to lead the country's largest U.S. Attorney's office. He prioritized community outreach and developed a domestic violence unit, a community prosecution project, and Operation Ceasefire to combat gun crimes. In 1997, President Clinton appointed Mr. Holder to Deputy Attorney General, making him the first African American to hold that position. As Deputy Attorney General, Mr. Holder created Lawyers for One America, a program designed to diversify the legal profession. In 2001, Mr. Holder joined the Covington and Burling law firm as a litigation partner. He was then nominated by President Barack Obama to serve as the 82nd Attorney General of the United States. He served as Attorney General from 2009 to 2015 and is the first African American to hold this position. In 2014, Time magazine named Mr. Holder to its list of 100 most influential people. He returned to Covington and Burling as a senior litigation counsel. All in all, Mr. Holder served in government for more than 30 years and was appointed and confirmed under 3 presidential administrations. Mr. Holder's success and service inspires me to be for others what he has been for me. Representation matters, and witnessing Black lawyers hold the highest positions in a government that has tried to suppress our voices for so long motivates me as I journey through the beginning of my legal career. Please join me in welcoming Eric Holder.
Good evening. Thank you. Thank you. Good evening. I was just saying that was an introduction that had a lot of facts in it, and unfortunately a lot of years, you know. When I'm of a certain age, so you could have just said, you know, he was the U.S. Attorney. You didn't have to say what year. When he got out of law school, you didn't have to say what year, because I know you all are going, this guy, he's old. But I actually started when I was 3, so that's the deal. Good evening. It is my pleasure to be here with all of you today to celebrate what last week would have been Dr. Martin Luther King's 94th birthday. It's always refreshing for me to come back to Chicago. It's a city that holds a special place in my heart because it was here that Barack Obama was first introduced as the president-elect in 2008, renewing my faith that America is a place where all things are possible. It's also a place that is home to so many now good friends who I worked with on that historic campaign. And how fitting a venue is this, Rockefeller Memorial Chapel, the site of one of Dr. King's first major speeches in Chicago. And I understand he did it right there. We are gathered here today to commemorate Dr. King's life. It is hard to think about his birth 94 years ago without remembering also, unfortunately, his untimely death and the work that was left undone. We still feel that deepest of wounds, the passing of a man, but not the death of a dream, the vicious murder of our nation's most committed, most courageous, and most consequential drum major for justice, Dr. Martin Luther King. But on this day, we must also commit ourselves to making real the dream that animated his too short life. Now, the anniversary, I think, of Dr. King's birth provides an important opportunity, not only to celebrate and to reflect upon his truly, truly extraordinary life, but to consider where we are now as a nation, to take stock of the progress, to take responsibility for the work that remains before us, and then to rededicate ourselves to the dream of racial, social, and economic justice that I believe is Dr. King's living legacy. But let us also confront the truth about Dr. King. We tend to look at him now through the gauze of history. Let us confront the truth of Dr. King. In his short lifetime, Dr. King forced America to face what he termed the three evils: racism, poverty, and war. Racism, poverty, and war, the three evils. Though revered now, his focus on dismantling those evils sometimes made him an unpopular figure. By 1966, just 2 years before his untimely death, a Gallup poll found that almost 2/3 of Americans had an unfavorable opinion of Dr. King. 2/3. As he emphasized his opposition to war and spread the focus of his work outside of the South, he became a threatening, polarizing, and disliked figure. For many, he was a pariah. To me, he is a revolutionary, a freedom fighter. And let me remind you also that Nelson Mandela was a revolutionary, a freedom fighter. And do not forget that George Washington was a revolutionary, and in his own way, a freedom fighter. All of them agents of positive societal change. Now, in spite of what you heard about my age, I was too young to realize when I first heard of his assassination, in that moment of grief and heartbreak, how powerfully his spirit would live on. I felt the pain of his death, but did not understand what would happen to his legacy. I did not yet understand that no act of violence or hate, nor any temporal disfavor was strong enough to hold back the movement that Dr. King had launched, or deny the dream that he had set in motion. Now, I could not have imagined how passionately and effectively his many partners and supporters, some not yet born, but especially his remarkable wife, Coretta Scott King, and the late John Lewis, would carry his work forward. And I could never have predicted how the trail that he blazed in his 39 years. Now, think about that. He lived to be 39 years old. In 39 years, I could have never predicted how, in that trail that he blazed in those 39 years, would impact my own life. There is a direct line from his leadership on the front lines of the struggle to my service many decades later as our nation's first African-American Attorney General and the election of our nation's first African-American president. There is a direct line. We would not have had the opportunity to serve in those positions without the sacrifices and the vision and the accomplishments of Dr. King. Now, I wish that Dr. King could be here with us so that he could see how the new country that he helped to create has improved. I wish he could see how the system of American apartheid, a system of American apartheid that he fought against, has been legally dismantled. I wish he could see how people of all races treasure the memorial in his honor that now stands on our National Mall. Above all, though, I wish he could see how women, LGBTQ Americans, still distressed minority communities, and now students and citizens who have seen enough gun violence and threats to our democracy have canonized Dr. King's tactics, and how in acts of King-inspired nonviolent protest, they've launched their own movements, calling for and marching for fairness, opportunity, and justice. Now, despite the really extraordinary progress that has shaped the last 5 decades and transformed our entire society, we are still marching. We are still striving. And we're still calling on our nation's leaders to act with a sense of justice, compassion, and common humanity. Because the unfortunate fact is that in 2023, America's long struggle to overcome injustice, to eliminate disparities, and to eradicate violence continues. And the age of bullies and bigots is not fully behind us. Bull Connor and Jim Clark are gone, but parts of their legacy of intolerance and repression endure in the highest segments of our governments. Now, in my travels across this great nation, I often hear from people, and especially from young people, who tell me that they feel somewhat lost in their own country, unsure of where they belong, and fearful that America's too long-standing divisions are threatening again to tear our nation apart. This is indeed a time of challenge and a time of consequence. But Dr. King was no stranger to such moments. Throughout his life, and most famously on the eve of his death as he delivered that seminal mountaintop speech that would be his final sermon, Reverend King asked himself when, if given the choice of any period in time, when would he choose to be alive? As he looked at it, the question began with a journey through the ages, and at each step, whether Mount Olympus or ancient Rome, Lincoln's signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, or Roosevelt's call to fear only fear itself, Dr. King asked himself what era he would choose to experience and to try to help shape. His own, he ultimately decided. Happiness, he explained, comes from embracing the blessings and burdens of destiny. Happiness comes from embracing the blessings and burdens of destiny and the opportunities that arise in difficult times. He said, "Only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. Only when it is dark enough can you see the stars." Well, recent years and events have starkly reminded us that, once again, it is dark enough. We have not yet reached the promised land. But today, once more, we can see the stars. We see them in the courage and commitment of ordinary people nationwide, Americans of all ages, races, and backgrounds who refuse to give in to fear and frustration, who resist really shameful attempts to exploit and divide the American people, and who are keeping up the fight for the safety and voting and civil rights for all. We see them in people who peacefully take to the streets and to the offices of their elected leaders. We see them in the examples of those who, in the wake of senseless tragedy brought on by unnecessarily gun violence, have found their voices in calling for common sense solutions that respect our forebears, our law enforcement community, and our legal system, while prioritizing our most precious resource, our children. You know, it is times like these when the power of Dr. King's example and his enduring words are brought into stark focus. And one of the most important lessons he left is that the journey to the promised land requires the work of us all. He said again, "We not only have the right to be free, we have a duty to be free." We not only have the right to be free, we have a duty to be free. And that duty must not be borne lightly. We must push our society in order to achieve a more perfect union that lives up to those lofty values in our Declaration of Independence to ensure that our society realizes the truths that were proclaimed to be self-evident. Again, all men and women are created equal and endowed with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, let me be clear. It is necessary for us to be indignant and to take action. This is what animates Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail: impatience. It is the bedrock of his work, impatience. But the fact that Dr. King's strength was rooted in frustration and impatience, as much as it was rooted in faith, is of great comfort to me. And I say that because, as proud as I am of our country, my country, and as grateful as I feel for the progress that we've made and the opportunities that the civil rights movement made available to me, the truth is, like Dr. King, I am dissatisfied. Progress. We've made progress. I hear that all the time. Progress. We've made progress. Well, that is now not enough. It is finally time for the birth of the desired solutions. So I, like Dr. King, am dissatisfied. I am dissatisfied that every day in America, 300 of our fellow citizens are shot. And we have hundreds of mass shootings every year. Monterey Park has now joined the list of communities ripped apart by a mass shooting. And our inaction, our unwillingness to confront the purveyors of death ensure that there will be more. I am dissatisfied that economic progress remains uneven, that educational opportunity is far from uniform, and that in the face of these facts, black people are supposed to be satisfied by small, inadequate steps taken by a society that, although no longer legally racist, is still too negatively race conscious. I am dissatisfied that I had to have the talk with my teenage son, as my father had with me, the conversation that so many black families in America have had in order to protect their children, protect their sons in particular, about how to safely interact with people in law enforcement. But as the brother of a retired police officer and as someone who has spent his career working hand in hand with the women and men in law enforcement, I am also dissatisfied that the unpunished bad actions by a few have sown widespread mistrust for the dedicated, honorable men and women who wear the badge and who act valiantly to protect our communities. I'm also dissatisfied that too many women, Latinos, Asian Americans, Native Americans, lesbian, gay, and transgender Americans, and people with disabilities still yearn for equal opportunity and fair treatment. And I'm also dissatisfied that more than half a century after Dr. King helped to pass the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965, for too many Americans, the right to vote and the assurance that one's vote is counted fairly remains under siege. To me, this is the chief civil rights issue of our time. And in that regard, our nation is not as different as it should be from the America that existed during the life of Dr. King. The Selma March was about the right to vote. The deaths of those 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi in the Freedom Summer in 1964, James Chaney, Michael Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman, was about the right to vote. They were trying to register people to vote. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 has justifiably been called the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. So much of Dr. King's work was to ensure the right to vote. As he so often pointed out, the ability of all eligible citizens to participate in and to have an equal voice in the work and direction of government is not a privilege. It is a right. The ability to vote is not a privilege. It is a right. And as Lyndon B. Johnson said, and I quote, "The vote is the most powerful instrument ever devised by man for breaking down injustice and destroying the terrible walls which imprison men and women because they are different from others," unquote. Now, our nation's policies are determined by those who serve in elected office, and we must make certain that these representatives accurately reflect the choices of the American electorate and not the special interest. Yet in many communities today, our political systems are far from fair. It has been undermined by spurious and outright false claims of widespread voter fraud, absurd contentions of stolen elections, and by acts of voter suppression and the harmful purging of voter rolls. And it's been rigged by racial and partisan gerrymandering. That's why I published our Unfinished March last year, not only to highlight the problems and continuing attacks on voting rights in the courts and in communities nationwide, but also to offer solutions to ensure a better future. And that's also why I helped to launch and am proud to chair the National Democratic Redistricting Committee. The NDRC is working to make our democracy more representative, more fair, and we're attacking this problem from every angle. Now, we are doing a whole range of things, and we're working to ensure that voting maps are drawn fairly and that the integrity of the Voting Rights Act is, in fact, upheld. We're working to erase laws that make your ability to cast a ballot a function, not a function of your age, your ethnicity, or your party, and make your ability to cast a ballot a function of your age, your ethnicity, or your party, and not a connection, and as opposed to a connection to your country. But we need your help in making this happen. But joining this fight for democracy is just one of the many ways you can honor Dr. King's legacy and to help to shape America's future. It is time for each of us to ask, as Dr. King so famously did, and as we heard before, where do we go from here? How do we fulfill our duty to be free? That duty to be free. What more can we do as individuals and as a society to help realize Dr. King's vision of racial and social equality? Each of us must ask ourselves, what am I doing? Ask yourself that. What are you doing? How can we lift up the values that were at the heart of his sermons, the root of his actions, the core of his character, and the center of his life? And most importantly, how can we heal this divided nation as he sought to do and bring our fellow citizens together in the name of tolerance, nonviolence, compassion, love, and above all, justice? It is only by coming together that we can write the next great chapter of America's story. You know, Dr. King is often quoted as saying that the arc of the moral universe is long, but that it bends towards justice. And that's true. But it only happens when caring, committed people like you, like us, grab hold of that arc and pull it towards justice. Positive change is not promised. It is the result of hard work and great sacrifice. So today, let us not merely reflect upon our past or the memory of a truly great man. Let's pledge our best efforts to protect the advances that we have inherited from him and make real the legacy that's been entrusted to each of us by the good man that we celebrate today. Now, that is our charge, and this is our moment. As easy as it is, we must not look longingly towards a past that was comforting to too few and unjust to too many. This nation must end this mindless, backward-looking quest to make America great again. To make America great today, we must do the difficult things, embrace the uncertainties of the future, and then shape that future in the way that truly great American generations always have. We must not give in to irrational fear and manufactured division, but instead embrace needed trust and national unity. Do not gather once a year and make Dr. King a vision from the past. Embrace his work, his vision, and make him a living, vibrant guide to a better future. Never forget that positive change is not promised. It only comes about as a direct result of commitment, action, sacrifice, endurance, and adherence to the values we must hold dear. As Dr. King said, and I quote, "The hottest place in hell is reserved for those who remain neutral in times of great moral conflict." So let us rise to the challenges of our time. And in the spirit of Dr. King, let us signal to the world that in America today, the pursuit of a more perfect union lives on, the march toward the promised land goes on, and the belief not only that we shall overcome, but also that we will truly come together as one nation continues to push us forward. May God continue to bless Dr. King and our journey, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me round. freedom land, marching up to freedom land. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, help me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. Look into the future, let me see what it holds. Go in the direction of the journey unknown. When we're so divided, we just have to be strong and live for tomorrow. I know that we will make a change. We'll come together and ignite the flame. There's no reason we can't start today. 'Cause we're united, united, we don't have to do this alone. United, we are stronger, singing as one. United, we will march and carry on. 'Cause we are united. Different kinds of people living under the sun. If we work together, anything can be done. How can
Strengthen our voices.
Strengthen our voices.
Oh, we have the power to declare.
There's room for all.
Even in the morning,
There is room for all.
even in the evening,
There is room for
there's something about this moment that brings a new feeling. No matter what comes, no matter what you in the room, there is room for all.
Now, I would like to introduce special guest speaker Valerie Jarrett, who will join Eric Holder in conversation. Valerie, oh. Valerie Jarrett is Chief Executive Officer and a member of the Board of Directors of the Barack Obama Foundation. She is also a Senior Distinguished Fellow at the University of Chicago Law School. She is the author of the New York Times best-selling book, Finding My Voice, My Journey to the West Wing and the Path Forward, published in April 2019. Ms. Jarrett was the senior advisor to President Barack Obama from 2009 to 2017, making her the longest-serving senior advisor to a president in history. She oversaw the offices of Public Engagement and Intergovernmental Affairs and chaired the White House Council on Women and Girls. Ms. Jarrett has a background in both the public and private sectors. She served as the Chief Executive Officer of the Habitat Company in Chicago, the Commissioner of Planning and Development for the City of Chicago, Deputy Chief of Staff for Chicago Mayor Richard Daley, and she practiced law for 10 years in the private and public sector. She also served as the director of numerous corporate and not-for-profit boards, including leadership roles as chairman of the Board of Chicago Stock Exchange, chairman of the University of Chicago Medical Center Board of Trustees, vice chairman of the University of Chicago Board of Trustees, director of the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, and chair of Chicago Transit Board. Ms. Jarrett has also received numerous awards and honorary degrees, including Time's 100 Most Influential People Award. Jarrett received her BA from Stanford University in 1978 and her JD from the University of Michigan Law School in 1981. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Valerie Jarrett and Eric Holder again.
Hello? Oh, it's working. Good. Good evening, everyone. So 66 years ago, a young 27-year-old, charismatic, vivacious, hopeful preacher preached right up here in the pulpit in this extraordinary Rockefeller Chapel. It was the first of 3 of his speeches on this campus, as you heard from our president. In his remarks on that first speech, he said, and as I quote, "We cannot slow up because we have a date with destiny. We must move with all deliberate speed. This is a conflict between the forces of light and dark. And in the end, there will be victory for justice and democracy because love will triumph. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl, but keep moving forward." I'm delighted to be here this evening in conversation with my friend Eric Holder, and I'd like that quote to help frame some of our conversation tonight. So, Eric, I love the ability to make him uncomfortable, because that's what friends do to one another, right? And I have the microphone, and he has to answer my questions.
I'm not sure that's exactly what friends do to one another, but okay.
Well, you'll see where I'm going with this. So, Eric always talks about the team and how everyone has helped make the kind of progress that he's made in life, but he doesn't like to talk too much about himself. But I think particularly, Eric, to our young people who are in the audience who see not necessarily a finished product, but let's just say you've accomplished an awful lot lot in your life, but I think it'd be helpful for them to get a little bit about your roots, your parents, how you were raised, the values. What made you decide to stand on the shoulders of Martin Luther King with other amazingly good company? What motivated you? What were your values? Tell us about your people.
Well, as you heard, I was born in the Bronx. I am the son of immigrants from the Pearl of the Caribbean, Barbados. For all you Jamaicans, Trinidadians, and everything else, that's secondary. Barbados, the Pearl of the Caribbean. My father, among the wisest men I've ever known, didn't finish high school. My mother graduated from Atlantic City High School and didn't even think about going, to college. That was just not something that women, at least in that era, thought about. Only just a few. I was raised in a West Indian household, too much peas and rice, but with a great emphasis on education and the notion that if you worked hard, you could accomplish a great deal. But I'm also a child of the 60s. I came of age during the 60s at a time when African nations were gaining their independence, Caribbean nations were gaining their independence, Barbados among them. The civil rights movement was in full flower. And I had that sense that through action, through the words and actions of Dr. King, who was a seminal figure in my life, as well as Malcolm X, that there was a system that needed to be challenged, that if challenged and pushed hard enough, it could in fact be changed. And so all of my work has, I think, really kind of revolved around that notion, trying to figure out what is justice and then figuring out how to actually get justice. And
what made you think that you could actually move that arc? I mean, what is it in how you were raised or educated that made you think, actually, put me in. I can make that 3-point.
Yeah, I think I have to give that credit to my parents, who believed in me well before I believed in myself. Whenever I had doubts, and I was a pretty doubting child, whenever I had doubts about, that next exam or what was the next year in school going to be like, what was high school going to be like as opposed to, junior high school, what was college going to be like. And, they always assured me that if you work hard, if you apply yourself, you can accomplish those things. But it was interesting. I remember my father telling me, people always say that you can be anything that you want to be. And I remember him telling me this. He says, but that's not true. He says, because if that were true, people be all kinds of things that they are not. And if I could truthfully, if I could have been anything I wanted to be, you would now be interviewing a Hall of Fame guard from the New York Knicks, if I could have been anything that I wanted to be. But they instilled in me the notion that if you focus on what your strengths are, work on what your weaknesses are, commit yourself to a cause, to a mission, that you can make that happen. I think that sense of self and that confidence that I have, comes from them.
So let's fast forward to when you and I met. During the 2007-2008 presidential campaign, Barack Obama was running. You were an early supporter. Give the audience, and obviously this is hometown, so they all know him pretty well, but you didn't. In fact, you met him for the first time at one of my cousin's homes, I remember. What was it that you saw in him? Anything in him remind you of yourself?
Yeah, well, we sat at Anne Marchand's house for a dinner. That's Valerie's cousin. We were sat next to each other. I thought that was just by chance. I've now talked to Anne as I'm doing my memoir, and she said that she actually placed us together. And so immediately we bonded about sports. He had this misconception that Chicago sports was better than New York sports.
Careful there.
And, he talked about Michael Jordan. I talked about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He talked about other people. I talked about, Dr. J. We had a whole thing there. But we also found out that on that first night that we also had an interest in criminal justice reform, things that he had done as a state senator, things that I had done as deputy attorney general. And then I remember going to his office every now and again to talk about, policy kinds of things. And we were in sync in terms of policy and worldview, but he was also a guy who I just liked. I mean, he was just a nice guy, so we bonded on any number of levels. And I remember him calling me up to say, he'd like me to be a part of the campaign. And as he was kind of giving me his pitch, I remember I cut him off like halfway and said, "Hey, come on, bro, I'm in. You don't have to convince me. I'm in. Let's do this." And I remember telling you when I first went to Iowa, and I thought this was going to be an idealistic quest with a small chance of success, but it was worth doing. And I remember coming back from Iowa where I saw enthusiasm in the people who I had met with, some crowds as big as maybe 500-600, some as small as 4 people in a library in Washington, Iowa, and saying, "Valerie, I think we might actually win." And I remember you telling me, "Yeah, that's why we're doing this. We're going to win." And so that personal, professional, that worldview that we shared and that you and I share, plus that tactical sense that you certainly had and that he had, made me think that this was a guy I wanted to get behind. Didn't make me extremely popular with some of the people who I'd worked with before, but that's a whole other story.
All's forgiven now. All right, so fast forward, he does win. As you know, I co-chaired his transition and was responsible for making recommendations on the cabinet, and we generated all kinds of names for all the positions, and Eric's name was on the list for Attorney General, and the first time he looked at the list, he looked at it and he said, well, let's go through, but I'm going to pick Eric. And we said, well, then why are we going to go through this? He said, no, you should go through your exercise. And when we finished going through our exercise and the vetting and all that, he said, now I'm going to pick Eric. So he always intended for you to be his Attorney General. Why do you think that is?
I think it was because, again, we shared that worldview. Our work was focused on, the criminal justice system in particular. We had talked about how we were going to approach national securities issues different from the prior administration. And I thought also, Barack Obama is a lot of things, but he's also a really good lawyer and a good legal historian. And he understood that there was going to be the need for an independent Justice Department. And we talked about that. And he said, our relationship's going to change. We'd become, relatively close by then through the campaign and through the vice presidential selection process, which I headed. And he said, but it's going to be a little different now. There are things that, we can't talk about. You as Attorney General should not be sharing with me. And I remember thinking to myself, this guy gets it. That's exactly right. The Attorney General is part of the administration, but is different from the Secretary of any number of other cabinet agencies. I remember Pat Leahy, who was then the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, said, "You're not the Secretary of Justice, you're the Attorney General of the United States." And Barack got that. And so I think, all of those things went into the mix.
Sounds very quaint now, right? Well, it's an interesting point because on the flip side of it, in my conversations with him, he said, I have to have an Attorney General who shares my values, my commitment to equity and justice, who will go in there and be the people's lawyer. He's the lawyer for the United States of America. He's not my lawyer. I have a White House counsel who's my lawyer in the White House. I'll have personal lawyers who are my personal lawyers. But this lawyer is independent. We could discuss policy, but we never once discussed an individual case. And so he said, so when I pick this person, I have to have this complete blind faith that they're going to do the right thing and that they are not going to be influenced in any way by politics for me. And I think that's why he picked you, because he knew you were your own person. You respected him. You guys were friends, but you were never going to blur that line that the people's lawyer cannot ever blur.
No, I think that's true. And, one stark example of that, a divided Justice Department had to decide whether or not we were going to defend the Defense of Marriage Act.
Give the audience who may not be completely familiar.
That's right. I forgot we have young people here.
Old people, too.
Oh, well, okay. The Defense of Marriage Act essentially said that, a marriage had to be between a man and a woman, but you could not have same-sex marriages. It had been passed by Congress, put in place during the Clinton administration. And through a bunch of procedural things, we had the ability to re-examine whether or not we should defend the Defense of Marriage Act, which traditionally the Justice Department does. That is, the Justice Department traditionally will defend any statute that Congress passes if there's a reasonable basis to do so. our Justice Department was divided. Solicitor General went one way, Civil Rights Division went another way. So I ultimately had to make the decision. I said, all right, we're not going to defend the Defense of Marriage Act. This is like a big deal. Both legally and politically. But I made the decision. And so I'm thinking, all right, I can't let the president read about this in the newspapers when we announce this. I mean, he's entitled, he's not a part of the decision. He's entitled to know about this. So we were at a Super Bowl party at the White House, humble brag, and I took him aside and I said, here's the deal, man. DOMA, we've been considering, I've decided we're not going to defend DOMA. And he said to me, boy, I'm really glad that that's the decision that you reached. I've been trying to come up with ways in which I could somehow signal to you, convey to you, but I figured I couldn't do that. So you ended up in the right place, and we kind of embraced. But think about that. I mean, as politically big a minefield as that was, as big a break as that was in what had come before, he never reached out, never signaled to me what he thought the decision of the Justice Department should be. And it was only at that Super Bowl party that I told him, this is the decision.
After the decision had been made.
After the decision had been made.
So I believe you had one of the most extraordinary tenures of any Attorney General in history. And I'm going to get to a tough part of your period, your tenure, in a second. But before we do that, share with us, in addition to making this really life-changing decision for so many Americans, what are you most proud of during your tenure as Attorney General?
Ooh, that's kind of like asking me which of my 3 children do I like the most. And on any given day, I could answer that question. But I would say the efforts that we put into criminal justice reform, the decision not to defend DOMA, the effort to bring all of the terrorism cases in the Article 3 courts as opposed to military tribunals, and then I think our defense of voting rights. Those are, I think, the 4 things I think I'm most proud of, and I think those are places where we made, significant progress.
So we're going to come to voting rights in a second, because the case that bears your name, Shelby County versus Holder, was not where we did not end up with the victory that we wanted. But before we do, I want to talk a bit about another area where I would say you contrasted with the successor administration, and that is around pattern and practice investigations. And since we are talking in honor of Martin Luther King, I think it'd be great to explain to the audience what those are, and perhaps the one that they would be most familiar with would be Ferguson, what your investigation found, and maybe even pull the curtain back on, we were in Martha's Vineyard when Michael Brown was killed, and you then went to Ferguson. So maybe in the context of Ferguson, you could talk about pattern and practice investigations.
Yeah, pattern and practice investigation is something that the Justice Department has the power to do as a result of the civil rights laws. That is to go into a community and look at a law enforcement agencies generally, but police departments usually most specifically, and decide. Make findings. There are things that a police department is not doing correctly. There are changes that need to be made. You go before a court, get a court order, and then the police department has to make the changes that the Justice Department has proven are necessary to happen. Michael Brown was a young man who was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. This was not only something that was national news, it was international news. There were demonstrations every night about Michael Brown's killing. There was this statement that what he had done was put his hands up and that he had been killed with his hands in the air. Our investigation showed that in fact was not true. But our investigation also showed that the Ferguson Police Department, as part of this pattern and practice investigation, was using the criminal justice system as a way to generate revenue by, and especially going after people of color and poor folks, pulling people over for traffic violations, minor offenses, bringing them into court, trying to get fines out of them, increasing those fines if people didn't show up in court. It was a revenue generator. It had nothing to do with justice. And so our pattern of practice investigation made that determination and put in place a whole range of things that the Ferguson Police Department had to change.
Okay, so now let's get to Shelby County, and also I want to.
We call it the Shelby County case.
He likes to leave off the Holder part.
Right. That's would you want to be like Dred Scott versus Holder? No, you wouldn't want to be your name engaged.
Just the Dred Scott.
Be a part of that. That's the Dred Scott case, the Shelby County case.
And in terms of its impact, extraordinary. So if you would give a short tutorial on the Voting Rights Act and why this particular section was so important and what gutting it actually has done.
Yeah, the Voting Rights Act, as I said in my remarks, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was kind of the crown jewel of the civil rights movement. Among the things that it did, it gave the ability of the Justice Department to look at election law practices in so-called covered jurisdictions, most specifically the states of the Old South, the Confederacy, to look at any election law changes there and to require that any changes that are proposed be pre-cleared by the Justice Department in Washington, D.C. So that if you wanted to close a polling place in Alabama, you had to get the Justice Department to agree to do it. Now, Alabama could say, well, no, we have a reason to be able to do this, and then a court would decide who wins, Alabama or the Justice Department. The Supreme Court, in a 5-4 decision in 2013, essentially took away from the Justice Department that pre-clearance ability. And as a result, states had the ability to do a variety of things that, had the Voting Rights Act not been gutted, that the Justice Department would have said, you can't do that. Since the Shelby County decision in 2013, 1,700 polling places around the country have been closed. I suspect the Justice Department would have opposed the closing of many of them. Voter roll purges have expanded, especially in communities of color. I think the Justice Department clearly would have opposed those kinds of things. A whole variety of laws that have been put in place to make it more difficult to vote, for certain people to vote, have been put in place that would have been opposed, and I think successfully opposed, by the Justice Department.
And your silent protest? Tell us about that.
Silent protest. It is traditional that the Attorney General argues a case before the Supreme Court, and they always pick the easiest case. You know, this is the case that no one could possibly, under any circumstances, lose. And so, you know, you get tails and all this kind of stuff. And after the Shelby County, I wanted to do it in the second term, but after the Shelby County case, I said, you know what, I can't stand before this court and pretend like it's business as usual. That decision, I thought, was going to lead to that which it exactly has led to, making it more difficult for certain people to gain their right to vote, to participate in our democracy. And so my silent protest was to refuse to go and argue a case before the court. Our SGs, our solicitors general kept saying, you got to do this, you got to do this. I said, nope, not going to do it, not going to do it. Now, I didn't make it public. I didn't make any statements about it, but you know, I understand the Chief Justice asked on a couple of occasions, well, when's the AG going to argue his case? And the decision I made was, your gutting of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 in a 5-4 decision that was not legally sound, that did not follow a great record established by Congress, and it was going to have these dire consequences, meant that I wasn't going to appear.
So a lot of the laws that have been passed since then, particularly in the South, yes, pause for, we love a silent protest. So a lot of the laws that have been passed since then have made it very difficult for people to vote, and one could argue that they are singling out ways of making it difficult for people of color, young people to vote. But they do it under the guise of avoiding vote fraud. So would you talk a little bit about the actual data about vote fraud in our country so that people understand that this is not actually, they're not actually solving a problem that is a problem?
Yeah, there is no problem of widespread voter fraud in this country. The Brennan Center has done a study and said that you're more likely to get hit by a bolt of lightning than to go to a polling place and cast a fraudulent ballot. So this notion that there's this widespread voter fraud that requires the imposition of all of these anti-democracy measures, unnecessary photo ID, restricting the ability of people to vote through the mails. You know, all of these things are anti-democracy and are directed disproportionately at communities of color, young people. And it's something that we have got to grapple with, So, you hear in Georgia, for instance, we conduct the most fair election, the 2020 election. I mean, the Trump folks, it was the most fair election. They didn't like the result. He ended up with 2 Democratic senators, no indication of vote fraud. And so what do? They go back and add additional anti-democracy measures. Ohio just passed some, I guess, in the last couple of weeks, all designed to try to make it more difficult for certain people to get the right to vote. My whole thing is, look, let's let as many people vote as is possible and let the American people decide who should represent them at the state level as well as at the federal level.
2 of my favorite examples are in Texas, your student ID will not qualify as proof of citizenship, but your registration to own a firearm will. And in Georgia, to the point you were just making, it is now against the law to bring food or water to anybody standing in line. So I picture my 94-year-old mother who always votes, has always voted, standing in line. Well, you know what? She can't stand in line. And in Georgia, they have lines around the buildings because they have shrunk the number of places where you can actually vote. And so now no food or water.
You see, and when that law was passed, people say, you can't give people food or water while they're waiting in line. What was that all about? Well, if you look at the 2020 election in Georgia, if you look in Atlanta, same election, same city. You look in the black precincts in Atlanta after 5 o'clock, it took you 51 minutes to vote on average. If you look at the white precincts in Atlanta, again, same election, it took you 6 minutes. So you think about that. You got African Americans who have to wait in line, and the lines get even longer, before Election Day when you have this pre-voting. And so that's where you see the notion of not giving people water and food, things that might allow people to stay in line. So there is this really kind of Machiavellian, draconian logic to the things that they do, all designed to make it more difficult for certain people to vote.
So there have been proposals for federal legislation. Could you give us the highlights of what you think would be most impactful of all of the alternatives that have been discussed at the federal level?
Yeah, I mean, I think a redone Voting Rights Act of 1965 that that the Supreme Court wrongfully knocked down, I think put that back in place. But don't make it cover only the states of the Old South. Make this something that is nationwide in scope. If you look at partisan gerrymandering, maybe the most partisan gerrymandered state in the country now is Wisconsin. But, Ohio also. These are problems not only of the southern states, but problems around the country. Have universal registration. If you interact with a governmental office in some way, you are given the opportunity to register to vote right away. Increase the ability of people to, they say vote by mail. I like to call it voting at home. Allow people to vote at home and mail things in. Use drop boxes. I mean, they've restricted the number of drop boxes. Have drop boxes. There's a whole range of things like that I think would make voting more accessible, make our system more fair, and make our democracy better.
So when you left the administration, I know you did some soul searching, but what am I going to do next? I've had my dream job. What's the next chapter of my life going to be? Could you share with us a bit about why you've chosen the redistricting? Talk a little bit about the nature of that work. You touched on it, obviously. And then, of course, your book, which is available in the back, The Unfinished March. What motivated you to write it? I know you were in the middle of writing your memoirs at the time that you decided to take a pause and write this book. Give us a little bit about why you felt that sense of urgency.
Yeah, it was interesting. As you'll know, the first thing that you did when you left was sleep, because that's a sleep-depriving existence, and so that was the big thing. But then Barack and I actually talked. President Obama and I, Barack and I talked about what we were going to do in our post-government lives, and we tried to identify what are the things that had the most pernicious impact on our democracy, our ability to govern. And we identified the problem of partisan and racial gerrymandering, where the lines are drawn in such a way that one party it's almost impossible for one party to lose. And we've had partisan and racial gerrymandering in this country for as long as we've been a republic. Democrats have done it. Republicans have done it. Princeton did a study that looked at the last redistricting cycle in 2011 and said that the partisan gerrymandering of that time was the worst of the past 50 years. And it had a real negative impact on the ability of the Obama administration to get a variety of things done. And so we said, let's try to make the system fair. Let's just make it fair. I'll stand against Democrats who gerrymander. I'll stand against Republicans who gerrymander, and I've tried to do that. Gerrymandering allows politicians to pick their voters. They draw the lines in such a way that they can assure themselves of victory. It means that you're more concerned about a primary than you are about a general election, which means it drives people in the Republican Party further to the right, Democrats perhaps further, to the left. And compromise is seen as a sign of weakness and invites a primary challenger. You don't compromise, nothing gets done, and the American people have a cynical view of ineffective, non-working government. So it's a problem that really undergirds a lot of the problems that we see. And the very tangible thing, you see a lot of these really draconian anti-choice laws being put in place after the Supreme Court overruled the Roe decision. If you look at every state, and the margins are different, say, in New York as opposed to Texas. Every state where polling has been done has said that they did not want Roe versus Wade overturned. They wanted women to have the ability to make their own choices about their reproductive rights. Every state. But in states that are heavily gerrymandered, representatives can do things inconsistent with the desires of their constituents and not suffer any electoral consequence. And that's how you get these crazy, anti-choice laws that I think they are unbelievably unpopular, but they can be put in place.
All right, we have just two more questions because Eric is actually catching a flight back home today. So before I get the hook from your team, I do want to get into two more questions. So first of all, in your time in the administration, there must have been countless pinch me moments where you experienced something that young boy growing up with this immigrant family would never have thought. Would you share with the audience? And I will tell you one, and I'm sorry if I'm stealing one of yours, but we went together to South Africa for Nelson Mandela's funeral. And I remember just looking at you and Susan Rice as we're standing there in the stands listening to President Obama speak. And so that was one of mine. So what were yours?
Well, yeah, this is a smaller part of that same trip. We flew over on Air Force One with President Bush and First Lady Barbara Bush, and there is a kind of mini Oval Office on Air Force One, and I had my contact lenses and I was going to put my glasses on, and so when I walked into that little mini Oval Office, President Obama was here, and First Lady Barbara Bush was sitting next to him. President Bush was on the other side. Michelle Obama was next to him, and there was at the front of the table, head of the table, an empty seat. It was the only seat. And so I walked in there, and I'm thinking, I got a former president and the sitting president of the United States, and I'm supposed to be at the head of all right, let's go for this. So I remember getting Pete Souza. I said, Pete, I was like, take a picture. And so that's one of my favorite pictures with me and the two presidents, the two first ladies. Tina Chen was there. I saw Tina. She was in the room, and so that's one of my favorites. But I mean, I think also at the very beginning, on that unbelievably cold day in 2009, when Barack was being sworn in, and coming out of the Capitol and looking at the mall. I've been in Washington since 1976. I've seen a number of, of inaugurations, not from that perspective, but to walk out and to see these literally millions of people, all excited, about the possibilities of this new administration, and to see this African American, this black guy who is, my friend, this person who shares my worldviews. That whole day for me was, an indication of the hope that I still have for America. Certainly the hope that I had for that administration. And I go back to that whenever I start to get a little down about, where we are as a nation or the progress that we're not making.
Perfect segue into the last question, which is that a lot has changed since that day. And I think that our nation, even regardless of political party, was kind of rooting for him at that moment. That moment didn't last very long in terms of the nonpartisan nature of it. And again, you've got a room full of folks of all ages, but speaking particularly to the young people who have endured the COVID pandemic, have endured the atrocities of the murder of George Floyd and too many other black people in America, and the incredible response with demonstrations, the likes of which were so much larger than anything we saw during the civil rights movement, which was, I thought, a very positive indication. But yet, they've experienced a lot of challenges in these years, not to mention the toxicity of the climate in which we are living, most particularly focused in Washington. Why should they be hopeful?
Well, I think there should be hope. I mean, that's one of the things I talked about in the book, because every generation of Americans has been called upon to defend democracy in some form or fashion. When the Great Rebellion, the Civil War happened, a generation of Americans had to fight to save the Union. We have sent the best of us to fight wars in World War I, World War II, other places, to defend democracy successfully. The Civil Rights Movement was a defense of democracy. It destroyed a system of American apartheid. Every generation of Americans is challenged to defend democracy, and so far every generation of Americans has been successful in that defense of democracy. This cannot be the first generation of Americans that fails in that quest. Understand something. Our democracy is under attack. We had a pretty good result in the midterm elections in 2022, and a lot of the concerns that I had did not actually come to fruition. But make no mistake, there are people, there are factions in this country who want to take this nation to places where it has never been before, who would sacrifice our democracy for the retention of power, for the acquisition of power. And so it is incumbent upon all of us, this generation, to do that which previous generations have done. Sometimes it means taking up arms and going across the seas to take on, fascists in World War II. Sometimes it means doing the things that we are doing now, protesting, voting, holding public officials accountable. But this generation must answer that same clarion call. I believe we'll be successful. And my optimism comes from these folks, from the young people in this audience, who are unburdened by a lot of the racial baggage and other things that my generation has carried. And it is my hope, as I've gone around the country talking to young people who see the America that they want, the world in which they want to live, the liberties that they think are appropriately theirs and they're right, and they're willing to fight for it. That's what ultimately gives me hope that this generation will be as successful as past ones.
Eric Holder, thank you for your service to our country. Eric Holder, everyone.
We give thanks for the words we just heard from none other than former Attorney General Eric Holder and Valerie Jarrett. And let's also give some applause to this amazing choir as well. Immediately following this moment, I invite each one of you to join us across the street, directly across the street at Ida Noyes Hall, where we will have a community refreshment hour. So you're welcome to come, have some good food, meet some great people, have some good dialogue and reflection. In closing, I thought I would invite each of us, especially since we have this really cool choir here, to consider yourselves spiritual cartographers. What do I mean by that? To sit with the various places, both material places and spaces we walk day by day, as well as the emotional contours or vernacular landscapes in our mind and in our hearts, as we commemorate and celebrate the late, great Dr. Martin King. Indeed, he and so many others, including Ella Baker, Bayard Rustin, Diane Nash, and countless names we will never know, they worked at the intersection of space, place, power, and belonging. And webbed within that nexus was an invitation that the scholar William Tate says is a primary question of who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor, and how then shall I live in community with my neighbor? And I invite you, since we're in this chapel, to take some time in the coming weeks and go back and reread or read for the first time some of Martin Luther King's sermons. In particular, his sermons, I think, give you a much broader, detailed, and thorough gaze into his theology, his philosophy, and his way of being. And if you can, check YouTube out and listen to some of his sermons and notice the oral capacity of the worlds that he builds, and so many others built alongside him. But back to the cartography. As you listen, think about the maps that you construct in your mind, the places you go, the things that are conjured as you listen, and like unto it, the kind of maps that you create in one-on-one dialogues with your classmates, in study, in the lab, in the grocery store, in the ways that we all inhabit and become, in essence, the beloved community. We've got some interesting days ahead, and I implore us to take that sort of freedom dreams approach that Robin D.G. Kelley would talk about, meaning we've got to be grassroots, and we've got to live this thing. We can't just talk about it. But since I happen to be a Marvel Comics fan, I figured, in closing, put on your 3D glasses, and let us all approach life, approach these coming days, thinking about things from various angles and dimensions, to see one another in new spaces, to think about our relation to society and one another in the ways in which we can contour and remap the landscape for more just, more equitable, more loving, and more diverse futures. So as we go in a spirit of joy, go in a spirit of whimsy, go in a spirit of liberation, and go in a spirit of love. And again, we invite you next door to the reception. Take care.